Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Afdalu salati wa tamu taslim ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'in. Jazakallah khair everyone for your patience. We are starting a bit late. I just got in. Inshallah, let's use these 22 minutes that we have, inshallah, to the best of our abilities. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa afdalu salati wa tamu taslim ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'in. Okay, so inshallah we're going to resume with verse number 13. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Verse number 13. And قال, he said, الذين, those, كفروا, disbelieved, لرسلهم, to rusul, messengers, him, their messengers, to their messengers. لَنُخْرِجَنَّكُمْ lam, surely, نُخْرِجَنَّ, we shall take, you, we shall take you all out, yani, min, from, أرضنا, أرض, land, noon is for our land, or لَتَعُودُنَّ, the lam is for you shall surely, تَعُودُنَّ, return, in مِلَّتِنَا, our religion, or you're going to return to our religion. فَأَوْحَى, so inspired, إِلَيْهِمْ, إِلَى, to him, them, رَبُّهُمْ, their Lord, so their Lord inspired to them, لَنُهْلِكَنَّ, lam, surely, نُهْلِكَنَّ, we shall indeed destroy الظالمين, the oppressors, the wrongdoers. Now, the noon here, noon is for tawqid, okay? It's for emphasis, just like the lam at the beginning is for emphasis. The noon at the end of لَتَعُودُنَّ, لَنُهْلِكَنَّ, these are all for emphases, okay? Verse number 13. Then the unbelievers told their messengers, you will have to return to the fold of our faith, or else we shall banish you from our land. Thereupon their Lord revealed to them, we will most certainly destroy these wrongdoers. Okay, so this is verse number 13. Again, we see the same horrible reaction that has always marred doomed communities, right? So the response to dalil was threat, right? The response to evidences that the messengers brought was an illogical get out. Because there is no logical way to overwhelm the divine arguments. So an emotional, irrational response takes the place of logic or consideration. No reasonable consideration was given to the words of the messengers. And simply a threat was given. Instead, we are going to kick you out or return back to our religion. And the theme mentions something really important here. Because of the word لَتَعُودُنَّ, you're going to return back to our religion, either get out, either we're going to kick you out, or you're going to turn back to our religion. So Mauludi mentions in his tafsir that it would be wrong to conclude from this demand of theirs that the prophets professed the religion of their people before their appointment to prophethood, okay? The implication of returning to their deen does not mean they were upon the deen of shirk before they became messengers. Rather, he said this only meant that their people thought so. The people thought that they had been upon their deen because, you know, they had lived quite normal, noble lives before their propagation began once they became prophets. So they just assumed that they had been on their deen, and now all of a sudden they are preaching something else. So they had, the people had the wrong impression that those men who became prophets by Allah's permission and grace, they assumed they had been on the religion of their forefathers, but this was not the case whatsoever. They had never, no prophet ever was a mushrik, and therefore there is no question of returning to that religion that they were never upon in the first place. So, okay, this is a very illogical, irrational, emotional, and ignorant way to respond to those who want the best for you, those who are the noblest of creation, those who are upon the purest of truths, right? And Sheikh Sadi mentions how the way they responded, that we are surely going to expel you from our land, and you are surely, or you will surely return to our religion. Sheikh Sadi says, هذا أبلغ ما يكون من الرد وليس بعد هذا فيهم مطمع, right? And he says this is the most extreme type of rejection that you could receive from the people you're calling to the deen, because not only are they saying no thank you, you keep your religion, I keep mine, I'm not converting, I'm not interested, but rather they're like, get out or come back to our religion, there's no middle ground between us. So after someone gives such an extreme reaction, at this point you can't even entertain the possibility of them eventually believing, right? لأنه ما كفاهم أن أعرضوا عن الهدى بل توعدهم بالإخراج من ديارهم ونسبوها إلى أنفسهم وزعموا أن الرسل لا حق لهم فيها, right? So they're saying that it wasn't enough for the disbelievers to be content with rejecting the messengers or just turning away from the guidance, right? They didn't stop there. But the wa'aduhum, rather, they threatened them with kicking them out from their lands, which, by the way, they're claiming to be their land, right? And that the messengers have no right in that land. وَهَذَا مِنْ أَعْظَمِ الظُّلْمِ. And this, he says, is of the greatest forms of oppression. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ أَخْرَجَ عِبَادَهُ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ وأمرهم بعبادته وسخر لهم الأرض وما عليها يستعينون بها على عبادته. And he says something very important. He says that this is such grave, or the greatest of oppressions, because Allah is the one who brought his slaves to the earth, to his earth. He's the one who commanded them to worship him on his earth. He's the one who subjugated everything on his earth so they could benefit from that in the path of his worship. And let alone those things, subhanallah, let alone those things, what happened is that they're saying, get out of our land. You have no claim to the land where you are disbelieving in Allah in. The earth is inherited by those of Allah's believing servants that are sincere to him. They're the ones who will ultimately inherit the land. You have no right to say, get out of our land, right? But of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not leave his messengers alone. He will not leave them in distress. Rather, after they receive this horrible response from their hyper-kufr communities, he inspired them that it is their stubborn people that were going to be annihilated. The messengers did not need to fear eviction or anything else, for Allah had their back, right? And if you've been paying attention to our journey through the Quran, then you see that the same threat of eviction was given to previous prophets like Shu'aib alayhi salam, like Lut alayhi salam, even to our prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam in chapter 8 verse 30. وَإِذْ يَمْكُرُ بِكَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لِيُثْبِتُوكَ أَوْ يَقْتُلُوكَ أَوْ يُخْرِجُوكَ وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. Surah Al-Anfal verse 30. And when the disbelievers plotted against you to imprison you or to kill you or to expel you, they were plotting, and Allah too was plotting, and Allah is the best of those who plot. And Ibn Kathir mentions that Allah gave victory and help to his messenger after that hijrah, right? After that expulsion, which the Quraysh must have thought was a clear victory for them. They could not have anticipated it. Within just a short 10 years, the Rasul would return back victorious at the conquest, with the conquest of Mecca, right? But this was, Allah's plotting is the best. And you don't mess with Allah's messengers, basically, right? You don't mess with the messengers of Allah. If you do that, even when people think things are turning in their favor, they in fact are only turning against them. So Ibn Kathir mentions how Allah gave victory and aid to his messenger after he immigrated from Mecca and gathered followers, supporters, and soldiers who fought in the cause of Allah. And there was, he received more and more victory, more and more power until Mecca was the same Mecca that they sought to expel him from and has become the center of Islam. And subhanAllah, this is the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَأَوْحَى إِلَيْهِمْ رَبُّهُمْ لَنُهْلِكَنَّ الظَّالِمِينَ وَلَنُسْكِنَنَّكُمُ الْأَرْضَ مِنْ بَعْدِهِمْ. Okay, this is the next verse, okay, that we're going to do right now. And لَنُسْكِنَنَّهُمْ, sorry, lam, surely, nuskinanna, we shall cause you to surely dwell, yani you, cause you to dwell, al-ard, the earth, mim, after, ba'dihim, after them. So this is an address by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from Allah, to the messengers regarding their people who threatened them with expulsion. Allah says, and we are going to surely cause you to dwell in the land after them. ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامِي وَخَافَ وَعِيدٍ, right? ذَلِكَ, that, yeah, this end, or this, inheritance of the earth, to dwell in it after the ظالمين, after the oppressors. This is liman, li, for man, the one, khafa, he feared, maqami, his maqam, yani the standing. Okay, like you can hear the word qiyam in this word, right? Qiyam is standing. Qiyamul layl is a standing at night. Yawm al-qiyamah, the day of standing, right? The day of resurrection. So this is for the one who feared the standing before Allah, obviously. Wa, and khafa, and was afraid, wa'id, of the threat, yani of Allah's threat of punishment. So verse 14. And will then cause you to settle in the land as their successors. That is the reward for him who fears to stand for reckoning and holds my threat in awe. Okay. That is the reward for him who fears my standing, or the standing before me, and fears the threat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So just like we have in Surah Al-Anbiya, a similar verse 105, وَلَقَدْ كَتَبْنَا فِي الزَّبُورِ مِنْ بَعْدِ ذِكْرِ أَنَّ الْأَرْضَ يَرِثُهَا عِبَادِيَ الصَّالِحُونَ, right? And surely we wrote or prescribed or declared in the Az-Zabur, min ba'di dhikr, right, that the earth shall be inherited by my righteous slaves. This is the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You, O messengers, are the ones that are certainly going to dwell in the land after them. Just like it was the Rasul and his followers that came to dwell in all of Arabia and beyond. And this is because of two things. This reward is because of two things. For the one who khafa maqami, right, who is afraid of standing before God, who's afraid of that qiyam, of that standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wa khafa wa'id, and is afraid, number two, is afraid of his wa'id, his threat, his punishments. If we can please mute ourselves, we're actually able to hear your back conversations. You can kindly mute yourselves. Jazakumullahu khairan. And you are afraid, of standing for Allah, you're afraid of his warning, his punishments, and you take his words seriously. You take his warnings seriously, right? ما توعدت به من أصاني فأوجب له ذلك الانكفاف عما يكره الله والمبادرة إلى ما يحب الله, right? So the one who fears standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this is something that necessitates the person to leave that which Allah hates and to rush towards what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. So, love is not a claim that can be simply made by a believer. It has to be proven by their action, by their lifestyle, right? When you have the full conviction of meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay, and of rendering account to him, you are not dismissive of his words. You are not dismissive of his words of warning, rather you take them to heart and you act accordingly. That is going to become a source of redemption for us in this world before the next, right? Because Allah says these are the people that are going to dwell in the earth. Here, of course, specifically directed towards the messengers, the prophets, right? And Tafsir mentions how this was to reassure the prophets that they should not worry at all about the threat that the disbelievers would banish them from their country, so it's like saying we will uproot them from their land and establish you and your followers in their place. And similarly, it is the believers that inherit the heavens and the earth once they're admitted into paradise by Allah's mercy. Then, inshallah, the believers get to inherit it all temporarily in this world for those that fear Him and fear standing before Him, and also permanently when the whole order of the universe is changed and the heavens and earth are inherited by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's believing slaves. Okay, I think we have time for one more verse, number 15. Let's do one more. وَاسْتَفْتَحُوا, literally it means to seek judgment, to seek a decision. And so they sought a decision, or they sought judgment. And khaba, khaba is like lost. Kullu, each, jabbar, stubborn or obstinate, anid, tyrant. Okay, verse number 15. They sought our judgment, and thanks to that judgment, every obstinate tyrant opposed to the truth was brought to grief. Okay, brought to grief. So khaba, here they have it translated as brought to grief. So not necessarily lost, but this is one translation. They were brought to grief. Yani, they sought punishment, or they sought rather judgment, right? They sought a final decision, and that brought them to nothing but grief, right? Because they sought a final decision by demanding divine scourge, essentially, right? And so every obstinate, jabbar, anid, tyrant failed and was brought to grief by that audacious demand, right? Asking for the divine decree in this case was, of course, equivalent to asking for the punishment, right? They did not just ask for, okay, just settle it between us, just have God make the decision. We're ready for the divine decision. This type of audacity and boldness cannot bring khair ever, cannot bring a good end ever, right? Believers, on the other hand, are always they're the opposite. They fear Allah's punishment. They would never ask for Allah's decree to be hastened in a context of obviously rejecting the message. They are completely different from that. وَاسْتَفْتَحُوا أي الكفار, the kuffar, the disbelievers, they sought a decision. They are the ones who asked and wanted things to just happen quickly, for the distinction to be established between the prophets of God and between themselves. So جاءهم ما استفتحوا به, so then came to them what they had asked for. وإلا فالله حليم لا يعاجل من عصاه بالعقوبة. So Sheikh Sadi mentioned that the only reason that they were overtaken by what they were overtaken by is because they asked for it. Otherwise, he said, generally Allah is, of course, Halim, right? He is forbearing. He does not hasten even those who disobey Him, right? He doesn't immediately bring about the punishment, right? وَخَابَ كُلُّ جَبَّارٍ عَنِيدٍ. So here, yes, they have this translation of khaba, meaning khasira, losing out in this world as well as the hereafter. من تجبر على الله وعلى الحق, whoever showed stubbornness and arrogance and resistance against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and against the truth, وعلى عباد الله, and against the servants of Allah. And the prime best noblest servants of Allah are, of course, His messengers and those who showed arrogance in the land. and were stubborn against the messengers and made life extremely difficult for them. So again, it is a mark of jahl, of ignorance, and of kufr, the way that they behaved, and of their tyranny as well. He mentions how in order to grasp the real significance of these historical events, we have to keep in mind that these are coming as answers to the objections which were being raised in Mecca before the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the conditions at that time were just like they had been in the times of the former prophets. So that's why you have examples of these former nations cited here to warn the Quraysh, along with the other mushrikeen, of course, to say that the former disbelievers challenged their messengers and they were destroyed, whereas the believers were established in the land. So it is by way of warning that they're being told to refrain. And likewise, essentially, your future depends entirely on the attitude that you're going to adopt. If you accept the message, you will be allowed to stay in the land. If you reject it, you're going to be completely uprooted. And that's exactly, literally what happened. Within 15 years of this revelation, not a single mushrik remained in all of Arabia. SubhanAllah, that is unbelievable, really. So what does kufr look like in real life? So much mention of it in the Quran with all the kafirin and what they're like. Well, what does it really look like? What does the attitude of kufr look like? What does not believing, what does it translate into in real life? It's really an attitude of just not listening. It's not very complicated. It doesn't need long explanations, and Allah does not go into long explanations or defining and describing kufr, right? We see this in the verse of Surah Al-Baqarah. Allah describes the believers in a few verses, and the munafiqeen in lots of verses, and the kuffar in very few verses. There's not much to it. It's simply not listening. It's not heeding. It's not paying attention. It's not taking into consideration what the other is saying. Not thinking, not considering that perhaps the other may have a point. It's remaining inflexible in the face of unfamiliar truths because they're not the truths that I'm used to, that I have always known, right? So as we conclude the class for today, the final lesson that I want to put out from just thinking about what kufr looks like, behaves like in real life, in real people that we may know, the lesson for us is that these characteristics of not listening, of not heeding, of not paying attention, these are really harmful for believers as well. Yeah, of course, they define the kuffar, but when we adopt these or fall into these as believers, they're extremely harmful for us, right? When we don't pay attention to what will benefit our akhirah, when we don't want to listen to nasiha or advice, which has become so unpopular and equated with judging me, right? That's exactly kind of what the kuffar used to do, just not listen, just not pay attention, just not take into consideration. So these characteristics are those we need to look out for and make sure we're not falling into these failings ourselves, as we sometimes grapple between our native cultures and the dictates of the deen, especially in the face of nasiha. So with that, alhamdulillah, we conclude. Alhamdulillah, we got in 3 verses, which is better than no verses. And inshallah, I thank you again for your patience with my schedule today. And we'll resume tomorrow, inshallah, at 4 p.m. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika. La ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.